Well, as you may know, rapper 50 Cent has been teasing a documentary about his purported rival, Sean Diddy Combs, for more than a year. But now the 4-part docuseries has finally premiered on Netflix. The series explores Combs' life, from his upbringing, the creation of Bad Boy Entertainment, to all of the allegations of assault and sexual abuse since the 1990s. And it also investigates his alleged connection to the deaths of iconic rappers Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur.
The silence is over. After weeks of rumors, speculation, and non-stop online debate, the daughters of one of the most controversial figures in entertainment have finally spoken out. And the reaction has been explosive, not because they held a press conference.
Year sentence after he was convicted on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution during his very high-profile federal trial earlier this year. A jury acquitted him of the top charges in the indictment, conspiracy to engage in racketeering, as well as 2 counts of sex trafficking. Now, the allegations against Combs, they have dominated the headlines since November of 2023. That's when his ex, Cassandra Ventura Fine, filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the music mogul, claiming he abused her during their 10-year relationship. And since then, he's not only faced this criminal trial, but also dozens of civil lawsuits that were filed on behalf of alleged victims. And many of the lawsuits include claims of sexual misconduct and rape and more. But to be clear, Combs and his legal team, they have adamantly denied any and all accusations of wrongdoing. Since Combs' arrest at the Park Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan in September of 2024, there have been several documentaries that have been released about the rapper's rise to the top of the music industry. There have been shows about his trial, but one of the most anticipated retrospectives is from a reportedly years-long rival of Combs, rapper Curtis Jackson, better known as 50 Cent. He is the executive producer of this project, initially teasing it with the title Diddy Do It, but the series was retitled Sean Combs: The Reckoning. It was released on Netflix on December 2nd, and it has skyrocketed to the top of the charts. In fact, 50 Cent posted on his Instagram on Wednesday, #1 on Netflix. You know, if you really like this docuseries, I'll make more, LOL. Now, the documentary's director, Alexandra Stapleton, said in a statement to Billboard, quote, "This isn't just about the story of Sean Combs or the story of Cassie or the story of any of the victims or the allegations against him or the trial. Ultimately, this story is a mirror reflecting us as the public and what we are saying when we put our celebrities on such a high pedestal. I hope this documentary is a wake-up call for how we idolize people and to understand that everybody is a human being." Okay, but here's the thing. Just one day before the series was set to air, Combs' attorneys sent a cease and desist letter to the streaming giant, calling the documentary essentially a hit piece, demanding it be removed. Now, we're going to take a closer look at that letter, the arguments that Combs' team is making for all of this to be taken down. But first, I want to talk about some of the biggest, maybe most shocking moments from the series, and then we'll get to the C&D letter. So to do all that, I want to welcome back on Elizabeth Vulai, legal counsel here at Law and Crime, who knows a thing or two about the inner workings of the media and when things are brought in. But you also watched the entire show. Elizabeth, it's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Now, you watched all of it. What was your main takeaway from the series? As somebody who actively followed the Diddy criminal case, has been here on Sidebar talking about the case, talking about his civil cases that he's facing, what was your main takeaway?
Yeah, there were a couple of takeaways. I think it was a really sort of original documentary, well put together. There were 4 episodes, usually most of them around an hour long, so it's very thorough. I think the 2 key takeaways were, one, everybody's talking about access to this footage and where it came from. One of the things that I think Diddy had done was he had said he'd hired a videographer. He's someone who films himself, as we've come to know, for most of his career and life. So he had hired this videographer to kind of follow him through this process. I'm not sure if the thinking was, he thought that he might evade the charges and come out with his own documentary afterwards. But just the access of footage that we get, we hear him speaking to his legal team. It's very rare you get an insight into that because, again, that's usually covered under attorney-client privilege. So speaking to his legal team, kind of his own thoughts about what was going on, because also remember, at this point, we really hadn't heard Diddy talk much about this. He had issued an apology over that video of him and Cassandra Ventura in that hotel hallway months before, but he hadn't really given any interviews to the media. He hadn't spoken about it, probably on advice of his...
Not because they went on a media tour, but because when family members who have stayed quiet for years suddenly decide to speak, the tone of the entire narrative shifts. For a long time, the public conversation has centered on allegations, court developments, leaked claims, and behind-the-scenes whispers. The focus has been on power, influence, and the dramatic fall from the top. But now the lens has moved. Now it's personal. Now it's about family. And when daughters step forward in the middle of a storm like this, people pay attention in a completely different way. They didn't scream. They didn't attack. They didn't throw gasoline on the fire. What they did was measured, controlled, emotional without being chaotic. And that's exactly why it hit as hard as it did. Because when people expect denial or outrage and instead get calm words about love, pain, confusion, and loyalty, it forces everyone watching to slow down. The internet doesn't know how to process nuance. It prefers extremes. Either someone is a villain or a victim. Either a family stands united without cracks or it completely collapses in public. But what unfolded—
And Elizabeth Milner's voice, Queen Elizabeth, were both in the documentary, I think in like episode 4 when it was going into the trial or in his arrest. It was interesting. I'll talk more. I am curious about what you think of that footage, and we'll talk about how it factors into the cease and desist letter. First of all, no attorney-client privilege, because if he is actively, deliberately, knowingly recording that, the privilege, anything that he says to his attorney, that's waived, right?
Correct. So that was one of the first thoughts I had is, he's speaking to Mark Agnifilo, who's the lead attorney on his legal team. They're talking about, overall case strategy, the indictment that they expect to come down. My first thought was, we've never seen this before. This must be privileged. But again, you forget there's a videographer in the room. So when you think about attorney-client communications, yes, that's usually covered under privilege. But if you have a third party that you're inviting into those communications, that's not necessary, unless the person is an interpreter or maybe an accountant. If you have a videographer that's there not for legal reasons, you can make that argument that, the privilege is waived.
And by the way, that conversation, the actual context of it, it's something that we always were thinking was going on behind the scenes. There was a sense of frustration about how the media and social media was portraying Diddy and the narrative, and he was like, we're losing. And he was getting a bit combative with Mark Agnifilo about what was going on. And he's like, look, I did everything. You said I'm basically an ideal client, a star client. I did everything you want. I came to New York. And he was just waiting to see if he would be arrested and indicted. And that was like a bit of tension there, which it's a rare behind the scenes glimpse of what those conversations and what those moments are between an accused and their defense attorney before the hammer drops.
Yes, very rare. And that's, I think, one of the things that struck me and what a lot of people are talking about. Again, you don't usually get a window into that. I think the push and pull was, in the conversation, Mark Agnifilo had said, look, an indictment hasn't been dropped yet. The indictment came down September 16th of last year. And Mark Agnifilo had said it's mid-September at that point. So I think the indictment was really just about to drop. So at that point, you have Diddy who, he said, look, I've come to New York. I've basically surrendered. His legal team is taking the position, you have to cooperate and kind of show that you're here ready to take this head on. But then Diddy's sort of saying, we need to get someone out there on the comms front, as somebody who's, in his words, has dealt with the dirty side of media and propaganda. So I think what Diddy was trying to say was, there's nothing to be done legally on the criminal front because no indictment had been dropped yet. But in the court of public opinion, it seemed like he wanted to take a more aggressive approach to put a certain message out there. And his attorney seemed to kind of think the opposite.
And just to be clear, so the documentary begins with this shot of Combs in his hotel room in New York. This is, I believe, just 6 days before his arrest last year. Turns out Combs had hired this videographer to film him while he's in New York. The documentary's producers got their hands on this footage, and he's talking on speakerphone with Mark Agnifilo, this high-powered attorney, who is, by the way, just one of several lawyers he would have on his multi-person legal team, and says that more needs to be done to help his public image, that it appeared to him like they were losing. And remember, again, this is before he was officially indicted and arrested. Now, apparently he knew it was coming. He'd been under investigation for months at this point. In a statement to NBC News, Combs' publicist, Judah Engelmeyer, said, quote, "The footage was created for an entirely different purpose under an arrangement that was never completed, and no rights were ever transferred to Netflix. A payment dispute between outside parties does not create permission for Netflix to use unlicensed private material. None of this footage came from Mr. Combs or his team, and its inclusion raises serious questions about how it was obtained."
Here was something more complicated. It was the sound of children defending a father while also acknowledging that the world around them feels unstable. That balance is difficult. That balance is uncomfortable. And that discomfort is driving the massive reaction we're seeing. Alleged family secrets have been circulating for weeks. Stories about what life was like behind the gates. Stories about private tensions. Stories about things the public never saw during the years of fame and dominance. Some of those stories are unverified, some may never be confirmed, but once the phrase family secrets enters a headline, the public imagination goes into overdrive. People want to believe that the truth is darker than anyone realized. They want hidden layers. They want dramatic revelations that reframe everything they thought they knew. And when daughters break their silence in the middle of that atmosphere, every word gets dissected. What stood out wasn't just what they said, it was what they didn't say. They didn't validate the rumors. They didn't provide explosive details. They didn't confirm the secret narratives that social media detectives have
aimed and why Netflix chose to use it. Now, Elizabeth, we're going to talk more about what Combs' legal team has to say in this cease and desist letter, but what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's hard to say because there's still such a big question mark in the air because, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, is one of the executive producers on this series. Him, the director, Netflix in general, is not saying where they got this footage, only that it was obtained legally. Diddy's side is saying this is coming from a videographer I hired. I know we'll get into the cease and desist. One of the arguments they make is, this is subject to NDAs or agreements that the videographer had signed with Diddy because he was, employed by Diddy, and therefore the footage belongs to Diddy. That's the argument that they're making. So it's difficult to say because Netflix is not really saying how or where they got this footage from. One of the things that they did say was that it was sent to them legally. So, if you have the videographer sending the footage to them physically, that would be fine, but it does leave a question mark about where the legal rights are coming from. The only really avenue I see is if there's some way that the videographer had obtained a license for the footage, then the videographer would have the ability to take that license and then transfer the footage over to Netflix. But if the footage belongs to Diddy, then that's a little bit tough.
That's a good point. Okay, let's keep that in mind. We'll talk about that in a minute. I do want to talk about the content of the series. So the series featured interviews with many people who were at one point in Combs' inner circle. This includes Aubrey O'Day, who was a member of the girl group Danity Kane, which was created on Combs' MTV show Making the Band. She has since accused Combs of basically grooming her, firing her for refusing to give in to his alleged sexual advances. We have Albie Shore, singer, songwriter, former record executive, dated Kim Porter before she was in a relationship with Combs. There's Roger Bonds, one of Combs' apparent former bodyguards, who's gone on the record to say that he knew Combs was allegedly physically violent with his then-girlfriend, Cassie. At one point in his interview with the documentary's producers, he said of Combs, "When I first met him, I liked him as a person because I didn't know him." You have Kalina Harper, who was part of Combs' group Diddy Dirty Money, released a statement supporting him after the third member of that group, Dawn Richard, had filed a lawsuit against Combs. And in the documentary, Combs can be heard calling Harper to complain about the lawsuit, asking her to put out a statement. A former friend, business partner of Combs, who appears throughout the documentary, is Kirk Burroughs, the co-founder of Bad Boy Records. The two apparently worked very closely together for years. Burroughs served as the general manager, handling the rapidly growing company's funds. And according to Burroughs, when they started Bad Boy, Burroughs was given a 25% stake in the company, with the other 75% being in Combs' mother's name, Janice Combs' name. And we're going to get more into why Burroughs alleges it was set up that way in just a second. But according to Burroughs, Combs allegedly threatened him in 1996 with a baseball bat, forcing him to sign over his stake. So Burroughs apparently sued in 2003. The lawsuit was thrown out because too much time had passed since the alleged incident. And more recently, Burroughs sued Janice Combs for fraud, Combs himself for sexual harassment. This is according to a report from Cinemaholic. And those appear to be ongoing, by the way. Now, Burroughs claims that he was blacklisted from the entertainment industry, led to periods of homelessness. He's since re-entered the music industry, starting Pop Life Entertainment in 2018. This is also per Cinemaholic. So, Elizabeth, there's a lot here. But what did you make of the Burroughs part, where he was proving, this kind of relationship that he had, and that he was coerced into giving up his stake in what would become a multi-million-dollar company? I mean, I guess the allegation is basically that Diddy ruined his life.
Yeah, that was there are a lot of difficult moments in the documentary. I watched all 4 episodes as mentioned, and that was a tough one. And again, information that we hadn't really seen before in prior documents.
Constructing. Instead, they focused on love, on loyalty, on the difficulty of watching someone they care about become the center of global scrutiny. That approach has divided audiences instantly. Supporters are saying this proves the bond is real, that children wouldn't stand publicly beside someone unless they believed in them, that loyalty under pressure is the strongest kind. Critics are saying this is what families do in public even when the truth is complicated. That unity on camera doesn't automatically erase allegations behind closed doors. And that tension is exactly why the reaction has become so massive. There's also a deeper layer here. When powerful men face public collapse, the impact doesn't stop with them. It radiates outward. Children inherit the spotlight whether they ask for it or not. They inherit the questions. They inherit the side eyes. They inherit the comments section filled with strangers debating their private lives like it's entertainment. Breaking silence in that environment isn't simple. Every sentence becomes a headline. Every facial expression becomes a meme. Every pause gets interpreted as hidden meaning.
So, this is someone who had co-founded Bad Boy Entertainment with him. A lot of the things he was saying seemed to kind of run along the theme that I think prosecutors were trying to push in the actual case, was that in the prosecutor's view, this is somebody who will do anything to basically get what he wants. He doesn't really care what effects or damage that causes to other people. And it's in different ways, right? Whether it's in the context of alleged abuse, business disputes, alleged sexual assaults, things that have been alleged in the civil lawsuits against him. And I think with Burroughs, it was really, kind of seemed to strike that theme as well, because he's saying, he had forced me out of the stake of my company. He had to deal with things like homelessness, while in the 2000s and 2010s, Diddy was really prospering, music, business, fashion. And one of the things that he had said, what he alleged in the documentary, and again, this is an allegation from him, was that the name Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs's name was not really involved in that on the corporate side. And one of the things he's saying is the reason for that was to avoid having to pay any liability from, the devastating basketball game that had happened in the early 90s, where he was the subject of wrongful death lawsuits because of the multiple deaths that had occurred as a result of that basketball game that Diddy was behind organizing. So that was really, surprising to hear.
Yeah, that was a big allegation, because the families of the victims killed in that stampede, it was horrible. We're talking about December 28th, 1991. Combs, fellow rapper Heavy D, they hosted this charity basketball game. The game took place at the gymnasium of the City College of New York. And according to the New York Daily News, before the basketball game started, people who weren't let inside, they broke a window, swarmed toward the entrance of the gym, all went down a staircase. The doors at the bottom of those stairs open towards the stairs, not towards the gym. So once a crowd got down there, they couldn't get the doors open and people started being crushed. 9 people died, dozens of others were injured. And there were no criminal charges that were ever filed against anyone for the stampede, but multiple families and injured victims, they filed lawsuits. And that's just one part, right? So I actually wanted to get into this too. The docuseries devoted a lot of time to the killings of Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls, and Combs' alleged connections to this, to both men, obviously knew both of them. So there have been accusations made in the past that Combs' involvement in the East Coast, West Coast rap feud of the 90s, there was more than just talk, that it could have involved things like hit orders. Now, to be clear, these are allegations. There's no evidence to suggest this. This series, though, it emphasizes that he has never been investigated or charged regarding their assassinations. Nevertheless, several interviewees during this documentary expressed that Combs' actions seem suspicious in hindsight. The documentary plays part of an interview that Dwayne "Keefe D. Davis did with investigators looking into Tupac's murder, which had become a cold case. And on the tapes, Keefe D says that Combs agreed to pay him if he killed Tupac and also rival record label head Suge Knight. Now, Davis allegedly admitted that his nephew Orlando Anderson was the one who shot the men, killing Tupac, injuring Knight. But Davis says Combs never came through with any payment. And by the way, Davis is currently awaiting trial for Tupac's murder in Las Vegas. Combs has always denied any involvement in the assassination. That was a big moment, I would say, Elizabeth. That was a big part of this. I didn't know that was going to be a part of this documentary.
I was really surprised as well. So I believe it's the second episode that dedicates a lot of time to it. And like you said, there have been insinuations in the past. They played video clips of, Sean Combs being asked in prior interviews in the 90s and 2000s, do you know, who killed these men? Did you have any involvement? He's always denied it, to be clear. These are just allegations. But yeah, that was really, really shocking. And one of the sort of a little bit more of the backstory behind his alleged involvement with Tupac was that
The pressure is enormous. Public reaction has also been shaped by generational differences. Younger audiences often view public statements through the lens of authenticity. They analyze tone, body language, and word choice. Older audiences sometimes focus more on loyalty and family honor. Both perspectives are colliding in this debate. Some are praising the strength it takes to speak publicly during chaos. Others are questioning whether loyalty is clouding judgment. And that debate keeps the topic trending. There's another layer people don't talk about enough. When children defend a controversial parent, they often face backlash themselves. Strangers question their intelligence, their morality, their motives. They become targets even though they didn't create the storm. That dynamic can be emotionally brutal. Choosing to speak anyway suggests either deep conviction or deep pressure, or both, and outsiders will never fully know which. The massive reaction also reflects society's obsession with the fall of powerful figures. When someone once seen as untouchable faces scrutiny, the public doesn't just
was the ankle bracelet and the ankle monitor that if you had money to afford $250 a month for the process and the technical details, you could do that. And I can't imagine there wasn't some extreme, unique situation where they could pay for private security guards to monitor, to report. It's just interesting to me that with all the money he has and all the resources he has, they couldn't craft some solution that lets him be under some form of house arrest. And again, it sounds like special treatment, but the truth of the matter is to incarcerate somebody like him is expensive to all of us. We're taxpayers, and he's got to have unique situations. You can't put him in general population where, everyone wants a piece of him and everyone wants to be his friend and everyone. So maybe some solution where his money could help us craft. He could build his separate jail cell, and we could keep him there. Just interesting to me that they sort of said, nope, you're going to be treated not like everybody else, but a lot like everybody else. Having money doesn't do it. So I wouldn't want to be those judges. There's sort of a no-win situation for the judge. And it sounds like they're erring on the side of caution. We're going to do what we would do for anybody else, which is keep him incarcerated for fear he flees. And then it's on us. This guilty person or this potentially guilty person gets to go on and live their life because the judge let them have bond. It flips from he's the bad person to now the judge made a mistake. That's what judges don't want.
Just to play devil's advocate for a second, if we're going back in the timeline of Diddy, there were federal raids performed on his home back in March. So obviously he knew about it then. He could infer, okay, they're going to investigate something. And speaking with his legal team, he again could infer charges could be coming down the line. So if Diddy was going to run, he had all the time in the world, 6 months between those raids and then when he was indicted, to run. Is that something that his defense could highlight and say, hey, he could have left but didn't?
I think you should practice law because that's an excellent argument. I think it's a 100% correct argument, which is he had the opportunity to flee, except that sometimes people don't think rationally. Some people that are in power often think, I can get away with this, I can get away with this. And then when they finally realize they can't get away with it is when they try to look at other options. So yes, it's a good argument that he had all the time in the world to try to get away. If he knew this was coming, he should have seen it, and he didn't run. That's taking the approach that we're going to trust people. And unfortunately, not everybody trusts people, and he's going to be locked up until they decide on whether he's guilty or innocent or takes a plea. But yes, that's the argument I'd be making if I was his defense lawyer. What are you afraid of? He could have left 100 times, and he didn't. And he will give you any safeguards you want. And he'll pay for the safeguards. Even though he shouldn't have to. He'll pay whatever it takes so that he doesn't have to be in jail because he's innocent right now.
His defense team did bring a interesting bail package, kind of what you're talking about, a GPS monitor so that people could know where he was, a restriction on the people who could come visit him, specifically women. A lot of people were going to co-sign on this, and it was going to be $50 million. And this was denied 2 times. But now there may be a win for Diddy, potentially, that a new judge has been assigned to the case. Do you think it's possible now that this new judge reconsiders and takes the defense up on this giant bail package?
Want legal outcomes. They want emotional drama. They want family fractures. They want proof that the empire was unstable all along. So when daughters present a united front instead of open rebellion, it disrupts that expected storyline. It complicates the narrative arc people were anticipating. There's symbolism in daughters defending a father during crisis. It taps into ideas about protection, loyalty, and legacy. It makes the situation feel less like a courtroom drama and more like a generational turning point. Because that's what this really is. Beyond the allegations and secrets, this is about legacy. How will this era be remembered? How will future conversations frame the family? How will the children carry the weight of what's unfolding right now? Breaking silence is a defining moment in that process. It says, we are not just background characters in this story. We have voices, we have perspectives, we have emotional stakes, and we are choosing to speak. Whether that speech changes public opinion is another question entirely. In the age of viral narratives, opinions are stubborn, but it does change the texture of the conversation. The situation is still evolving. Rumors will continue. Commentary channels will continue analyzing every frame. Critics will continue questioning motives. Supporters will continue defending loyalty. But something shifted the moment silence ended. The daughter stepping forward turned a spectacle into something more personal. It reminded people that scandals don't just consume careers, they consume families. They alter dinner tables. They change how siblings look at each other. They create private conversations that no camera will ever capture. And while the public debates alleged secrets, the family at the center of it is navigating reality without the luxury of logging off. That tension between public perception and private experience is what makes this moment so charged. The world wants clear answers. Families rarely operate in absolutes. In the end, the massive reaction isn't just about what was said, it's about what it represents. A shift from rumor to response, from silence to statement, from speculation about hidden truths to a visible display of unity. Whether that unity holds, whether new revelations emerge, whether the public softens or hardens its stance, all of that remains to be seen. But right now, one thing is undeniable. The silence is broken, the daughters have spoken, and the conversation has changed.